could turn and take a look at the chart that you just glued into your notebook. Some of you might recognize this from last year. This is actually a copy of a 4th grade chart that we used. Guys, you need to spread out a little bit. You're not so distanced. This is a copy of a chart that we used in 4th grade when we were doing our unit. Remember when we read the book Front Desk? All right, and when we talked about the things that we want to pay attention to when we are growing in interpretation, when we're taking our notes, we want to pay attention to the characters. And a lot of you, I noticed, have a page for each of the characters that you're starting to meet. And when you learn something new about the character, you're flipping to that page to add that information to what you already have. Also, it talks about keeping track of the plot. And you know, plot is something that's confusing to a lot of people. But plot really is what most of you are anxiously reading a story to discover. What happens next? So the plot really is the series of events in the order in which they take place, in real time. Okay? Now, even though we've talked a lot about how we need to think beyond just the plot of what's going to happen, the information that we keep when we're keeping track of the plot can somehow be great information for us to support our ideas and our thinking. If you've decided to stay at your seat, that's perfectly fine, but please remember, it's very easy to disengage from the lesson when you're sitting back there. So you might have to work a little bit extra harder to stay engaged with the learning and the lesson so you don't miss it. Okay, the other thing that we want to keep track of is the setting. Where and when is this story taking place? And we've kind of talked a little bit about our story that we've been reading as our read aloud, and about how Katherine Applegate is drawing this extreme contrast between Africa, where Ket comes from, and Minnesota, which is his new home. And remember, one of the things we do as 5th grade readers is we don't just notice that that's happening, but we ask ourselves, why? Why did Katherine Applegate choose to show that contrast? Because Katherine Applegate could have had him move to Florida. Katherine Applegate could have had him move to Minnesota in the summertime. But she made deliberate choices to have Ket come to Minnesota in the middle of the winter because that climate during that season is in sharp contrast to his homeland, where he's coming from. Now, we may not know the answer right now as to why Katherine Applegate is doing that, or we might have an idea. And we can hold on to that idea, remember, very loosely and continue to collect evidence to support it. The last thing on our chart is objects, repeating objects. And we read about an object yesterday. Remember that cloth that Ket has in his hand, that he keeps in his pocket? He reached inside of it when he talked about his mother. And it described that piece of cloth as being very soft, only about as big as his hand, and that it felt like grass, soft, new grass. Okay? And he reached into his pocket to hold on to that when he was talking about his mother. And if you remember, at that time, Dave was basically saying to him, we don't really know where your mother is. And then he said, we don't even know if, and he never finished that. Remember, Ket jumped in and said, she's fine. She's fine. Okay, so the reason why we bring this out is just to remind you of the things that you should be paying attention to while you're reading. And then once you have found an idea, that as we continue to read, you're looking for evidence to support that idea. One of the major standards in 4th grade was for you to be able to identify how an author supports an idea. What do they give as evidence? How do you know? It's a tough standard to master. Okay? So now we're going to come at this standard from a different perspective. Now we're going to have our own idea about the story. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, and as we continue to read, as we think back to other parts of the text, we're going to be collecting that evidence. So one of the things you can do as you're thinking about your idea is that you can write or start or use a sentence starter by, I know this because. All right, let me show you what I'm talking about. One of the ideas that I have about this story is that Katherine Applegate is writing and choosing her words in a way that lets me as a reader know that Keck is struggling with the English language. And one of the ways that she does that is by drawing out how Keck calls common objects that we know. He either describes them or he calls them by something else. Okay, and so if I were to go back or if I were to continue reading on, I would be looking for evidence of that, and I could find that evidence very, very quickly. As a matter of fact, in the very first page, okay, it talks about the flying boat. And we know that from the readings that we've done up to this far, that the flying boat refers to an airplane. We also, if you remember from yesterday, we also know that Dave asks, how was the airplane ride? And Keck doesn't respond. He doesn't answer. And it said in the text, Dave used my words to ask the question. And Dave said, how was the flying boat? So we know that either there is no word for airplane in Keck's language. All right, we know that. There's no word for that. We also know that Keck is struggling with English, remember? There's other evidence that he's struggling with English. Several times in here he describes how it hurts his mouth to form that language. It hurts his mouth to talk. His mouth is sore. When he's having to answer all these questions, he's worried about what is going to happen and how he's going to feel. My mouth is going to get very sore, stumbling on words all day long. He wonders if everybody in America is curious. Is he going to be having to answer all of these questions all the time? Okay? He talks about how when he uses his own words, it's music. It says, she's fine, I tell him, and I look out the window at the not dead trees. Okay, whoa, I just realized something. If you infer, Dave is trying to say basically that I'm not even sure your mother's alive. But let's make some connections here to the words that Katherine Applegate is using. Keck describes the trees as dead because there are no leaves on the trees. Dave explains that the trees are okay It's just winter and the leaves fall off, but in the spring they'll grow back. So when Dave, I love the fact that you're all gasping right now. So when Dave says, we're not even sure, and he says, she's fine, he looks at the not dead tree. Yes?
I think it's because when Dave says that they're going to come back, that the trees are going to come back in spring, that the mom's going to come back in spring.
That's definitely an idea that I would write in my notes, because I think that that's something that we can kind of grow, that we can collect more evidence of. Yes?
I think that, I forgot what I was going to say.
It's okay. That's okay. If you think of it, jot it down in your notebook. Okay?
Oh yes, and I realized it.
Yes.
He's a refugee. That means that he's in trouble in Africa.
Right. It's dangerous.
Yes. What about the family?
Well, what do you think? What's your idea?
His mom's also going to be a refugee, I think.
That's very possible. That's an idea that you can jot down in your notebook. Okay. I'm going to continue to read the story today, and I want you to remember what we've learned. Once we have an idea, as we're reading, or if we go back and reread like I just did, we should be collecting more evidence. We should be seeing in the text where our idea is being developed, how our idea is being developed by the author. Now remember, an idea is not right or wrong unless the evidence in the text doesn't support it or contradicts it. That's when we need to revise it. And even as our idea gets stronger, we may be revising it so that it's more precise. Okay. The next section in our book is called What the Heck? We drive down a long road with many fast cars. Still, there are buildings, but sometimes not. I see a long fence made of old gray boards, and then I see the cow. Now we know the cow is important because the cow is on the cover. Stop, I yell. I feel regret in my heart to use such a harsh sound with my new helping friend. Please stop, I say, gently this time. What? Dave asks. What's wrong? Did you not see her? The brave cow in the snow. Dave glances in the looking back glass. So lots of evidence to support the idea that he doesn't either doesn't have the words or that he doesn't know the words. The looking black glass, what do you think that is, Nick? The mirror, the rear view mirror, the one that's in the center of your windshield and you can see back. He glances in the looking back glass. How? Oh yeah, that used to be a big farm. A lot of land around here is getting sold off now, but that farmer is hanging on. I don't understand his words, but I can hear that he doesn't love cattle as I do. And I feel sorry for him. I love it. Ava flipped to her page about Keck. She is listening with a 5th grade reader's ear. I don't understand his words, but I can hear that he doesn't love cattle as I do, and I feel sorry for him. I twist in my seat. The don't move belt across my chest pulls back. Oh, what the heck, Dave says. I have not learned the meaning of heck, but I can see that it's a fine and useful word because he turns the car around. The next section is called God with a Wet Nose.
Oh.
Just listen, and I think that the name of the section will become clear as we read through it. We park by the side of the fast car road. Walking through the snow is hard work, like wading across a river, wild with rain. The cow is near a fine, wide-armed, good-for-climbing tree. To say the truth of it, she is not the most beautiful of cows. Her belly sags and her coat is scarred, and her face tells me she remembers sweeter days. My father would not have stood for such a weary old woman in his herd. And yet to see her here in this strange land makes my eyes glad. In my old home back in Africa, cattle mean life. They are our reason to rise with the sun, to move with the rains, to rest with the stars. They are the way we know our place in the world. I'm going to read that back because remember last year we talked when we were doing Number the Stars, we talked about sometimes you get to a part of the story that just stands out to you as being super important, that something very important is being delivered to you as the reader, and that we need to pay attention to it. In my old home back in Africa, cattle mean life. They are our reason to rise with the sun, to move with the rains, to rest with the stars. They are the way we know our place in the world. Okay, so my brain is just clicking away here. I'm thinking about the contrast between the way life was in Africa for Keck and where he is now. Where he is now, the climate is so different. The language is so different. He's having trouble understanding and communicating. And he sees a cow. A cow, something that comes or is familiar to him because they have cows or cattle in Africa. And I love the way Catherine Applegate describes this. They are the way we know our place in the world. And I think about Keck, and I think Keck doesn't know his place in the world. He's not in his home. He's not with his family. At least not his truest family, remember? The cow looks past me. I can see that she's pouting with only snow and dead grass to keep her company. I shake my head. A cow can be trouble with her slow, stubborn body, her belly ripe with milk, her pleading eyes that shine at you like river rocks in sun. An old woman comes out of the barn. She's carrying a bucket. 2 chickens trot behind her, scolding and fussing. The woman waves. Just saying hello to the cow, Dave calls. Let me know if she answers, the woman calls back. And she returns to the barn. We should go, Dave says. Your aunt is expecting us. A little longer, I say. Please? I know cattle are important to your people, Dave says. Again, he tries to use my words. A man I helped to settle here taught me a saying from Africa. I'll bet you would like it. A cow is God with a wet nose. I laugh. We wait. The wind sneaks through my coat. My teeth shiver. Notice that? My teeth shiver. I take off a glove and hold out my hand. And at last the cow comes to me. she moos, a harsh and mournful sound. It isn't the fault of the cow. She doesn't know another way to talk. She can't learn the way I am learning. Word by slow, slow word. I stroke her cold, wet coat, and for a moment I hold all I've lost and all I want right here in my hand. I'm going to read that part again because that stands out to me too. I stroke her cold, wet coat, and for a moment I hold all I've lost and all I want right there in my hand. I want to remind you of what we learned today. We learned that when we're growing an idea, we have to find where it lives in the text. Where is evidence of our idea in the text? One of the things you've been doing in your independent reading is that you have been writing like a 5th grade reader on your sticky notes, and you have been placing it right where it lives in the text. Okay, another way that you can do that, if you're sketchnoting or if you're using a sketchnote journal, which you will be doing in your book clubs, is you can jot the page number down. So as we're starting to form our book clubs next week, and we transition from sticky notes in our independent reading to sketch notebooks to go with our book, we'll start to write page numbers so that we can have evidence to support our themes and our other ideas that we have about a story. Okay. Today is Friday, and we are going to do some logging and switching. If you could stay where you are for a second.